Starfield is 5 months away, and we've still got a good couple of months till the showcase, so while there's a bit of a drought on that end, I figured I should make a video all about games you could play while waiting for Starfield. I then remembered I'd already done that. It's this video, you should be seeing the thumbnail on screen, and yeah, you can go watch it. If you want like a bunch of sci-fi game recommendations, go give it a watch. It's a good video, I'm proud of it. But in the meantime, I figured I still want to do some sort of video like that, so instead of games specifically for Starfield and waiting for that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of my favourite games of all time. And to start off, we've got Skyrim and Fallout 4. So I'm grouping these two together and also not going to talk about them for too long, because if you spent more than 5 seconds on my channel, then you'll have already seen some Fallout 4 or Skyrim videos. I've made so much content on these two games, and it's because I love them. They're great games. They're just really good Bethesda open world RPGs. And while I have negatives, my negatives are all pretty minor, and the fact I'm still playing these games years and years after they've been out, it's a real testament to how much I enjoy them. I put in well over 1,000 hours in both of them. Skyrim, I don't know how many hours I've put in, but it's more than 3,000 hours, and Fallout 4's more than 1,000 hours now. So I'd say combined we're probably looking at a good 5k hours just between these two games. I've played so much of them. A lot of the time I've spent on them has resulted in stuff on the channel, so feel free to look through multiple years of my videos if you want to see more about these games, but you already know them, they're no surprise on the list. So let's move on to the next game, which you might not have heard of, Chained Echoes. This released last year, and was my game of the year for 2022. This is a charming 16-bit turn-based pixel RPG, and I don't think there is anything I can say to do this game justice. It's a little indie game made by like one developer. I picked it up on Game Pass because I was like, oh yeah, this is the kind of thing I might enjoy, let's give it a try. It's something I've been trying to do a lot more recently. You'll have seen my subscribers will know that I've been doing a series called First Look where I try out new games, and Game Pass has been great for that for me. It's let me just experience the odd thing here and there, which I wouldn't want to commit buying in and of itself, but it's nice to just give a try of. I beat Chained Echoes quite fast, as in within a couple of weeks maybe, I want to say. I really binge played it, and I got very excited recently because there was a blog post talking about like New Game Plus, which I'd love to do because I'm only missing a few achievements but I haven't gone back for them, and I haven't even explained too much about the game. It's very much like the old school 16-bit RPGs, but with a lot of modern takes and a lot less of, oh, this mechanic's really dated, or oh, this character's so dated, or oh, we can't have that now sort of thing. It fits very well in the modern world. It's an amazing blend of a fantasy, old school like swords and sorcery game, but also with giant like robot mech suits that you get into, which I'm actually looking at the list. There's a couple of games on here where you basically get into a big mechanical suit. I mean, the first 3 entries all have some form of that, because Fallout 4 you've got Power Armor where they made it a big mech suit. Chained Echoes you have 2 separate like combat gameplays, one where you're on foot and the other one where you're in the big robot. And the next game on the list will also have big robots, but we're not on that yet. Chained Echoes is brilliant. I cannot recommend it enough. The characters are all incredibly well written. It's a game that took years to make and is a real passion project of Matthias Linder by the looks of it. And yeah, just did an incredible job. It's been insanely well reviewed. I haven't actually looked up like what the average review scores are for the games I'm listing because I don't care too much, but if I were to hazard a guess, I'd say this is probably the highest reviewed score game on here, because it's really kind of a cult classic kind of hit. I can't even call it a classic, it's the most recent game on the list. But it's brilliant. It is brilliant. If you're into that style of RPG, then go and play it. I cannot recommend Chained Echoes highly enough. Next, we have Titanfall 2. So here's a game which is one of the best I've played, but is probably the lowest on the me recommending to go and play it. Because it is great, and I'm going to talk about that, but then we're going to have to discuss why I wouldn't recommend it in most circumstances. So for those not aware, Titanfall 2 is a first-person shooter, and I got super into it when it came out. I want to say, I think I got both Titanfall and Titanfall 2 for free. I'm pretty sure I've never spent money on a Respawn game, which feels kind of bad in one sense, because I love them. But I think there was just certain offers going on with those being given away on Xbox, and Titanfall 2 I got super into. Because the key thing for me is that it's your standard first-person shooter, but there's wall running and sliding and grappling and just some amazing mobility mechanics, and it feels so fluid and fresh and just great. I in fact bought or pre-ordered Cyberpunk 2077 after they announced wall running for that game, and then there was no wall running. Like, Titanfall 2 is the only game I've played where the mobility feels perfect. And I don't use that word very often, but it feels perfect. You could do amazing stuff if you got good with the game, and even if you were just alright, you quickly learned how to slide around and do these extra things, and that was a brilliant aspect. And that's only half of the game, because you also cooled down your Titans with giant mechs which you could get into, and it made you a lot more slow and cumbersome, but also very hard to kill, and you got giant weapons, and I loved that it has those two different ways to play. And another thing I haven't got on my notes, which I'm just looking through, but I have to mention, is another stroke of genius which more like multiplayer FPS games did. It had a bunch of like AI grunts, so non-player controlled enemies, which really weren't good, but you could go around and kill them and it would score points for your team. It was only like 1 point each, as opposed to like killing an enemy player was like 10 or 15 or something. So obviously, you're not getting as much of a reward because it's much easier to kill these grunts. But what it means is that if you're not good at the game, if you're bad at it, you can still go into a match and score points. You can still provide like some help for your team. And that is a brilliant mechanic, which I love, because it stopped it just being a case of, okay, whoever's got the highest skilled player is guaranteed to win, because they're really good and the other team's really bad. Obviously there's still a huge element of that and you never want to remove it entirely, but having like these little AI things, where people who were getting used to the game or who just aren't as good as FPSs in general were able to still contribute to the team and help with achieving a victory, was just a brilliant mechanic that I want more multiplayer games to do. It relieves the stress of like letting down your team, which I get quite often, and yeah, it's a brilliant thing. Brilliant little thing they added in. Additionally, I remember really loving the progression and unlock system. So a lot of games obviously now have battle passes, but even in the old COD days, you had like prestiging and all of that stuff, and a very slow kind of grindy, just keep playing the matches and you'll get through. Titanfall 2 always felt like it got the progression right. Like you had to work to unlock later stuff, but you had a good selection of weapons and skills and stuff at the beginning, you unlocked them fairly fast, but if you wanted fancy skins or stuff, it would take extra work. But all the practical stuff was easy enough to unlock just by playing enough of the game. And yeah, I just want to shout that out, because so many games screw you over on the progression and unlock systems. Titanfall 2 felt really good. Problem is, this is a bit of an old game. It's not multiplayer only, but it's multiplayer first, that's the main thing. And I don't think there's many people playing it these days. If you buy it for the multiplayer, you're gonna lose out. However, if you can pick it up really cheap, I'm talking like $5-10 max, it has a surprisingly good single player campaign. Obviously that's not the selling point of a game, but it's still great, and well worth trying out. You still get all of the great movement, the shooting, and you don't have to worry about letting your team down, which I've already mentioned you don't have to worry about anyway, but you have to worry about it even less. So if you're into your single player games, Titanfall 2 is still worth picking up cheap. If you're multiplayer only, maybe check out Apex Legends instead. It's Respawn's newer game, it's a battle royale. I've been playing a lot of it recently and having a lot of fun, but it is a lot more competitive and high stress. Next on the list, Middle-earth: Shadow of War. So this is quite a thematic change here. We're going back to fantasy with a Lord of the Rings game. Unsurprisingly, as the massive nerd I am, I love Lord of the Rings, and that's a big appeal of this game, but the best thing it has going for it is the Nemesis system. What this essentially does is when you die in the game, it's not just, oh, game over, respawn from your last save point. There's none of that. What happens instead is the orc that kills you, or the olog that kills you, or whatever killed you, unless it's like a warg or something. Basically, the orc that kills you then becomes like a big mini-boss character that you can either go and hunt down, or try and recruit into your army in later parts of the game. It's such a nice system and creates its own mini-narratives within its own overarching story of the plot itself, and it's brilliant. This is also the only, like, pure third-person over-the-shoulder camera sort of game I've got on this list, and I think it's worth pointing out, I hate third-person over-the-shoulder cameras. I recently gave up on the Mass Effect trilogy, just entirely, those hugely respected games, I gave up on them, because third-person is not for me, and a game has to be exceptional and cater to me so well for me to put up with third-person, and this game does. There's also a bunch of, like, smaller details which are great. The skill selection you get when you level up, there's just a real nice variety of stuff in there, and you're never just getting a skill which is like, do more damage. Instead you get stuff like, okay, you can activate traps at a distance, or you have a teleport attack which lets you just shoot forward and then slice at the enemy, or you can shoot an arrow to pin a person in place. Like, everything has a real purpose to it, and it allows for different approaches to combat, which is the main part of the game. Like, the plot overall, I enjoyed it, but I know a lot of people were about it, but going and hunting down orc captains, taking over fortresses, defending our own fortress, that's the big selling point of it. There are also themed orc tribes, which helps to differentiate between all the different orcs. You're not just fighting generic enemies constantly. The tribes and the classes and personalities and different voice lines, they all add up to make things feel really unique. I still have memories of Tars the Tower. There is a playlist on my channel called Fight Pit Fridays, where Tars the Tower was basically the hero of that. He was just this unstoppable orc, and I still remember him. I haven't played that save in years, but I still remember that character, who was created entirely by the Nemesis system, and just brilliant. I will say the launch of Shadow of War was quite bad, because it was very microtransaction heavy, there was a lot of grinding added in superficially. But that stuff is, while not entirely gone from the game, I think it's still somewhat in there, but very, very minor ways. That stuff is now no longer like a barrier to entry in any way, and yeah, the game's improved so much, so if you heard bad things about it initially, forget those thoughts, take a fresh look at it. Brilliant game, I love it. On to the game that's been eating up most of my time these days, Total War Warhammer 3. So I love the Warhammer world. It's maybe my favourite fantasy universe. It's either that or Discworld, with Lord of the Rings probably coming in third, but those are in the top three, and I don't know any good Discworld games, so I just had to deal with a Warhammer game and a Lord of the Rings game. You get it. But yeah, the Warhammer world is an amazing fantasy universe to live within. I know there's a whole Age of Sigmar thing going on, but the actual old world Warhammer is brilliant. It's very much what you'd expect in a lot of senses, like men and elves and dwarves, you know, the standard stuff, but there's also like their own unique things, like the Skaven, who are rats the size of men, who are like secretly living underground and a lot of people don't believe even exists, but are trying to take over the world. There's the Forces of Chaos, which is all about corruption, and like turning the good to evil and then destroying the world. There's a lot of destroying the world and taking it over. That's a big thing of Warhammer, and Total War Warhammer 3 lets you do that. You are in charge of a legendary lord and their entire faction, and you just go across the world, taking over settlements, fighting these huge epic battles, doing diplomacy and stuff if you're into that, and like having people on your side and doing military alliances. It's a big strategy game, not super deep strategy. I know within the Total War community, people often complain a little bit that the Warhammer games are a little shallow on that side. For me, they're deep enough to still be enjoyable. And yeah, it's a brilliant game. Additionally, Total War Warhammer 3 is kind of 3 games in one, because Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 each had like smaller maps but have been expanded on in the third game, and you now have a map of the entire world which you fight through in the Immortal Empires game mode, which is what basically everyone plays on single player. And it's brilliant. You're just taking over an entire world with hundreds of factions. I'll probably show some of the faction screens on here, because it's amazing. It is incredible. The extended lore of the game and extra little snippets you get here and there have helped me to love it more. I have put in so many hours into this game. This is another one where, within the franchise, I'm at over 1,000 hours now between the 3 games, and I'm going to put in a lot more, because the Chaos Dwarfs DLC is coming out soon, and while it's the final DLC I'm planning on buying for the game for a long while, it looks really, really cool, and I kind of can't wait for it. It's the next thing I've got to look forward to. And finally, my last one on the list is Final Fantasy IX. This is probably my favourite game of all time. I specifically haven't put these in like too much of an order, but whenever people do ask me about my favourite game, it's Final Fantasy IX. Everyone's like, oh no, it's going to be an Elder Scrolls or Fallout game. Nuh-uh. Final Fantasy IX is the game I grew up on. And while I don't actually have childhood memories, don't ask about it, I don't know the answers, I've also forgotten them, it has had a real impact on my life and how I choose to be. I literally have on the desk next to me, oh I forgot this, I'm recording in real time and I forgot, but I have printed out these posters which you'll actually see on screen because I can edit these, but there's virtue, sorrow, arrogance, despair, indulgence, solitude, devotion, and dilemma, which each have their own message and relate to a playable main character in the game. Oh, this is like a JRPG, old school from the year 2000, turn-based combat, bit like Chained Echoes but a lot older. Surprisingly still looks great and not pixel art, but I figure if you're aware of Final Fantasy VII, this is 2 games after that. Not in the same world, it's very much a fantasy world, but yeah, the main reason I love this game is because of the impact it's had on me as a person. I purposely chose to live my life almost by a lot of the messages that this game conveys, rather than using any real people as role models. This game has defined me as a person more than any other, and I highly recommend it. It's also just really good. The characters are amazing, the story's brilliant, probably my favourite Final Fantasy story, and I've played a lot of the games, and the world as well, it has like a real nice warmth to it, but an underlying darkness which kind of draws you in. I love it. I love the game. There is no way I can describe it in the right way, because I'm not that emotionally open, but this is the emotional game on the list for me, and I love it so much. So much. But that was it. The list is over. There's 6/7/9/10. I've actually mentioned quite a lot of games, but there's a bunch of games that I really love and think are great. Go play some of them. Let me know in the comments if any of those are games that are your favourites. I bet a lot of you are going to say Skyrim and Fallout 4, because that's what a lot of you are here for. But hopefully some of you are big fans of the other games as well, and potentially can nerd out in the comments with me, because I'd be down for that. But yeah, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed this little peek into the kind of games that I love, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Sarge out.